Welcome back to the Labor Forum on WRFG. That was Charlotte Dos Santos with Red Clay, and we're going to bring y'all back into the Labor Forum program. Diane?
Hi, everybody. So Ajamu Baraka is here in the studio. We are waiting on our telephone call from Taryn Fivek, and there the light just went on, so here she must be. So the reason we have having these two guests on is last weekend was an important conference, in our opinion, of the Labor Forum team, of a conference by the United National Anti-War Coalition, which has taken very progressive and anti-imperialist positions and has really helped energize and re-motivate the anti-war movement during this period. And so we wanted to have a little bit of information about what happened at the conference from two of its participants. So as I said, Ajamu Baraka, world traveler, is here in the studio. Many people might know Ajamu from his many years here at the Human Rights Network offices over in the Georgia Hill building, and many other activities. And on the phone we have Taryn Fivek. Hi, Taryn.
Hi.
We're glad you're here with us. So Taryn was at the conference as a representative of the International Action Center and did one of the workshops. All right, so both of you, thank you so much for being here. And let's just plow right into it. So why is an organization or a coalition like the United National Anti-War Coalition not just an important effort by those that are concerned around issues of anti-imperialist struggles and colonial struggles, etc. But here you are on the Labor Forum. And so we want both of you to address, from your own perspectives, why this conference is something that the workers who listen to the Labor Forum and all the others should know about. So Taryn, just to say, I'm going to start with Ajamu because he's right here, and then I'll come to you. Is that okay?
For sure.
All right.
Well, thank you for allowing me a few minutes to share with you. I really appreciate it and always enjoy being back here and on these shows, like coming back home. So why is this conference important? Why is this coalition important? Well, this is one of the last standing national anti-war coalitions here in this country. And we know, and you all know better than most people, that when we have war and conflict, when the U.S. is involved in its imperialist adventures around the world, that the sector of the population that's the most impacted domestically, the ones who make up the bulk of the U.S. forces, are who? They are working people, working class folks, folks that have been part of the poverty drive here in this country. Folks who were compelled to go into the military because of the fact that the jobs don't really exist anymore. And these are the folks who end up being deployed over and over again in these adventures, and the ones that come home maimed and injured, and the ones that don't come home at all. So working class people have an interest in putting a brake on the adventurism and irresponsibility of U.S. policy that's resulting in the permanent wars that we have seen over the last 2 decades. So this coalition is an attempt to organize that anti-war sentiment, to put the focus on the fact that when we talk about national interest, we're really not talking about the national interest. We're talking about the interests of the 1%, the interests of the bourgeoisie, and that we as working people, as poor people, as activists, our interests are separate from the 1%. But the only way that we can make that separation clear in political terms is by organizing and building a powerful anti-war movement. And so this conference last weekend was the effort to try to, in fact, move toward reviving a powerful anti-war, anti-imperialist movement here in this country.
Taryn, I'm going to go to you because you represent sort of a new generation, the next generation of fighters against war, and you were at the conference. So would you want to address a little bit your reasonings both for being there and why you felt this conference was important?
Sure. Thanks again for having me on. I think that most simply, as Ajamu was saying, it's a poverty trap that brings a lot of working class people into fighting these wars abroad, back to this country, and they're really sort of thrust back into the same kind of meat grinder, I guess, that they find themselves in otherwise. The state is not prepared to deal with the fallout of what happens to people when they come back from PTSD and they commit suicide. I guess it's somewhere, it's a travesty of how many people commit suicide every single day who serve in the military, and a lot of that's because they can't find work or because they can't find medical treatment. But then at the same time, it's also the working class overseas that is find this. Here in the U.S., workers, they still do have a lot of power, and they have a lot of power on the job. They're what keeps society moving. And I think that this is absolutely relevant to their case because as the war against the working class and oppressed here kind of heats up under the Trump regime, we can see that that will also happen abroad. The United States spends somewhere around $600 billion every single year on its giant war machine, which just serves to impoverish and immiserate the working class all over the world. It is more than twice the amount of the next biggest military spender, which is China, and it just sort of seems ridiculous that when we can't get clean water in Flint, and when people are being murdered by the police, and when people can't find jobs, and when people are taking their own lives because they can't get decent health care and they don't want to bring down their families, that we would be spending this kind of money to sort of further this kind of misery.
I have a question, Ajamu. You went representing an organization, a new organization called Black Alliance for Peace. And if you could say a little about the significance of the day that organization was launched and what your purpose as an organization was being at the conference.
The Black Alliance for Peace was launched April the 4th of this year on the 50th anniversary or 50th commemoration of the very important speech made by Dr. Martin Luther King in 1967 in New York, in which he broke his silence on the Vietnam conflict. This was the point at which he felt he could no longer not speak out against U.S. imperialist policies, U.S. warmongering. And we all know that he paid the ultimate price because 1 year later, this is how the bourgeoisie likes to do things, 1 year later is when they took Dr. King from us. So we thought this was a date, a symbolic date that we should utilize in launching a new black anti-war presence here in the U.S. So we launched it on April the 4th of this year, and we are dedicating our work to not only Dr. King, but for all those who have the moral courage to stand against the U.S. war machine. And we believe that, Dr. King's example and the example of folks who came before Dr. King from the black community who have always taken a forthright position against war, militarism, and violence, they serve as examples that we wanted to embrace in building this new alliance against war, militarism, and imperialism.
Dawn, did you just take your question?
I think so. I think so. Because I was going to say, we were talking earlier off the air about the diversity at the conference this year. And I was going to ask you that in what way or why is it important for African Americans or Africans that are living here in America to get involved in the anti-war efforts that are going on here?
Well, we kind of touched on it for a moment, and I would defer to our other guests to speak on this too, that, when we talk about the working class and its impact in the U.S., we're talking about a disproportionate number of black folks also who are impacted by militarism and by war. We know that they are involved, that the U.S. military is involved in a very aggressive recruitment campaign in our schools. And so we have an objective interest to to struggle against that. And we know too that, you know, as was pointed out a moment ago, that the people who are impacted by U.S. war policies outside the borders of the U.S. are disproportionate, I mean, almost 100% people of color. So, you know, those of us who are part of the Black radical tradition, our internationalist position requires that we take these positions against war and imperialism, not only for ourselves, but in solidarity with all of the victims of U.S. imperialism.
Yes. So Taryn, could you talk a little bit about your view of the participants there in terms of, you know, it's often seen as the peace movement or the anti-war movement is this older white movement. And, you know, and some of us here at this table were part of that struggle, certainly during the Vietnam War, and have carried it on now for 40, 50 plus years more. So I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about either the different kind of perspectives, the different kind of tactics, the different kind of strategies that were brought up at this conference by people who are engaged in struggles from immigrant rights, Black Lives Matter, and are also engaged in the struggle against war and imperialism.
Sure. I mean, first of all, the participation at the conference I thought was just incredible. I'm originally actually from the South. I was born in Atlanta, raised in Jacksonville, and I thought it was really, really important to have this conference in Richmond to be able to show that it's not just something that exists in, you know, in New York or Los Angeles or DC or something, that this is a real working class struggle, and that it's a struggle that's rooted in communities of color, and, you know, and it needs to be representative of the entire country, which is the South. I think that there were a lot of youth there, and of course there were lots of Black and brown youth there as well. I know that there were even groups from overseas, like for instance, the ILPS was there, and they have a huge Filipino contingent that came. We had people who were able to speak on topics from all over the world. It was very multi-generational. Our contribution that we had as part of our workshop was to actually talk to people about how to be in the streets against war. Because I think that something that's understated is that a lot of these tactics, a lot of these weapons, a lot of this equipment that's being used against people at Stanford, against people at Ferguson, against people in Baltimore, all over the country, a lot of that kind of equipment and a lot of that tactics and strategy were actually sort of fine-tuned and developed overseas first, as sort of a testing ground to be able to come back and bring that here to control righteous rebellion of people who are against this military system. So part of what we were trying to do in our workshop about, for instance, street tactics, more of a political orientation, to try and teach people that it's not just about, you know, sharing stories on Facebook or on Twitter or anything like that, although that is totally critical and important, but how to be able to safely and effectively and in a very, you know, militant way, get in the streets, raise people's awareness around these issues. We've had a couple of actions here in New York now against the war in Syria, and that involves, you know, sometimes using creative tactics that are going to get picked up by news services or by social media. Maybe you're not going to have, you know, 100,000 people involved, although that is always, you know, something that's desired. But even if you just have, you know, a dozen people who are really committed revolutionaries, who are really committed anti-war, anti-imperialist activists, you can still do something like disrupt an event, you know, and make sure that someone's got a camera on it. You can still do things like ask questions of people at public events that can be videotaped as well. You can, you know, there are lots of different creative ways of working with the media as it stands now, which is almost totally against the anti-war movement. I know that after Trump bombed Syria on April 7th, that I think it was somewhere around every single op-ed that was published about the airstrike was in favor of it. So how to work with that, basically, with different tactics needs to be figured out. But yeah, no, I thought it was just incredible. There was so much discussed and so many different kinds of tactics that were being explored.
I was listening to what you said, Taryn, about the tactics that they have used in our community, and how they were developed overboard. And it made me think of this program here in Atlanta called Gilly, where they have been sending Atlanta APD officers to Israel to train, and then to send back in to the black community with these tactics and trainings.
That's right.
And Ajamu,
I mean, a lot of these cops who end up, busting up these anti-war rallies or these anti-imperialist actions are the same cops that
have training.
that set up Black Lives Matter movements, and a lot of them got their training in Iraq or in Afghanistan or even in Israel, and these were people who were taught to view the population as not being civilians. They're not taught to look at the people in the streets as anything but the enemy.
But the enemy.
So there's a dehumanization there.
Exactly.
And that's one of the issues that we have to talk more about, and that is the impact of the militarism and the permanent war agenda on the lives and the psychology of people in this country, the culture in this country. Many of the folks who ended up being deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan, almost 40% of those military forces came from the various National Guards. And the individuals who made up those various National Guards were disproportionately coming from services like the police forces. Mm. So those individuals went to Iraq and went to Afghanistan. Sometimes they were deployed multiple times. And they came back with this heightened sensitivity toward seeing all people of color as the potential, if not actual, enemy. And so there's a correlation, I think, between what we've seen as the brutal techniques, the almost hair-triggered use of lethal force by these militarized police forces, and the fact that we're looking at and immersed in a culture that's been at war now for 16, 17 years. So all of these elements are connected, and those are some of the things that we discussed over the last weekend.
I have a question about the need for independent politics. We just had the most expensive congressional race ever held last week. $40 million?
I think it was 50.
50. And in between these two candidates, there was no distinguishing them on this issue that we're talking about now. The Democratic Party candidate advocated that he would be for strong defense, talked about his credentials in terms of his work for the Defense Department. And so we see differences that are no difference. So how, in terms of an anti-war movement having a political expression, are we going to break free of this two-party problem?
Well, one thing that I found interesting about the discussions around the issues of war and U.S. intervention during the campaign was that Donald Trump, the right-wing candidate, was actually articulating positions that suggested that he wanted to reduce tensions between the U.S. and Russia. He raised questions about the role of NATO. He talked about cutting back on destabilization or direct intervention by the U.S. state, and he didn't suffer in terms of his base. So it suggests that this notion that there is this element out there, in particular among the right, that is just automatically, reflectively pro-war, has to be questioned. And in fact, we see that the party that seemed to be the most pro-war in its articulations, opposed to any kind of reconciliation with Russia, were in fact the Democrats. So the point is that people like Bernie Sanders and other people who claim to be progressives, there is a basis there, but they just don't seem to understand it, where they can take more progressive, anti-war, anti-imperialist positions if they had, in fact, the courage to do it. That the people in this country appear to be moving away from a reflective support for war policies. And so this period, is a period in which we, I think, can really begin to make some inroads in terms of rebuilding anti-war movement here in this country.
Karen, did you want to comment on that? And if you do or don't, I have a follow-up question.
Sure. I think that, there was a report that came out yesterday by Seymour Hersh, who I guess is no longer able to be published in the United States. This was in a Dutch publication, and it was about the airstrikes on Syria. And there was an interesting quote that one of Seymour Hersh's sources mentioned, where he said, I guess it didn't really matter whether or not it was Clinton or Trump in the White House. We were going to do this to Syria eventually. I think that a lot of what's going on at the top right now when it comes to the ruling class, the executive branch, the legislative branch, is that these things are almost outside of the control of the electorate. When it comes to just going to the ballot box, that you could sit there and vote for someone who says, there is no way I would ever make an airstrike on anyone, and yet once they get into office, they're sort of subject to forces beyond their control that are going to push them into this imperialist stance. And I think that, for Hillary Clinton's people, it's going to be, we have to do something for these poor people who are being, allegedly hurt by their own leaders, and, we have to do this out of a place of moral concern, like the women in Afghanistan. We have to help them. But with someone like Trump, it's just going to be bellicose, basically racist rhetoric that's going to be his justification for doing so. And you could see after the strike happens that, people on television were saying, well, finally, here's the president that we've all been waiting for.
Right.
Because I think that that's really what defines the leadership of the United States right now, is its willingness and its eagerness to go and wreak havoc and misery abroad for the bottom line for these, arms companies and for Wall Street, basically.
So my follow-up question to both of you has to do with the relationship, again, between what's happening domestically and how it can or will or might or should fuel an opposition to this even bigger increase in the Pentagon budget, this so-called call for all kinds of new weaponry under the Trump budget. So we've seen again with the healthcare situation that literally thousands and thousands of people across the country are up talking about healthcare. Some of them are raising single payer, but all of them are talking about that healthcare is a right. And so I was just wondering if you would comment again on the relationship between what's happening in the streets around police killings, around the Muslim ban, around healthcare, etc., and how you think that aids or builds the anti-war movement. We'll start with it, John.
I think that one thing we want to point out, and I think it's a weakness with the Trump administration and with the war agenda, is that because both parties have committed themselves to sort of what they call revenue neutral proposals, that Trump's proposal to expand military spending by $54 billion requires that they go in and decimate the federal agencies that are responsible for providing real needed services to people in this country. So they have to go in and they're going to gut the budget for the education department, for health and human services, for HUD and housing. Across the board, the Environmental Protection Agency, across the board, those agencies responsible for providing needed services, for regulating the work of the activity of these major corporations, that they are prepared to gut the federal government in order to free up resources to shift them over to the military. So, people have to understand they have an objective interest in opposing these kinds of insane policies.
So Taryn, we're getting very close. So you have like maybe a minute and a half to say a final remark about what you'd like to add to this discussion.
Sure. I guess I want to mention the fact that there were 250,000 families in New York City who got free heating oil from the government of Venezuela who received fuel aid across the country. I know that they received this in New Orleans as well. I know that after Katrina, the government of Cuba offered to send doctors in to be able to help there, and they were turned down for it. I think that the working class in the United States needs to know that these countries that the U.S. media is constantly demonizing as being, evil or awful or oppressive, countries like Cuba and Venezuela and Syria or whatever, or Palestine, the list goes on, Ukraine, all of these people understand that it's not the working class of the United States that is against them, that it is the people who are basically, these corrupt murderers who are running the country who are responsible for it. So I think that the more solidarity is built, the more that people realize that there is that kind of international solidarity that is desired from abroad. I think that once we go to meet that, we're going to see incredible results with that. I remember, how touched I was. I lived in Palestine for a couple of years, how when everything was happening with the Ferguson uprising, how Palestinians were contacting organizers immediately to try and advise them on the technologies that have been used against them and how to effectively combat them in the case of Ferguson. I think that there is, this closing in of capitalism coming to a dead end, and at the same time this rising internationalism. And I feel like it's a really positive time for people to become involved with the anti-war, the anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist movement.
Okay, Taryn, you have 10 seconds to give a website or some contact information, and so does Ajamu, and then we have to say goodbye for today.
Okay, well, you can go to the UNAC.org for more information on UNAC and the kind of work that we're doing, and then as for the IAC, that's IACNTR.org, IACcenter.org, and you can find both of them on Facebook as well.
And for the Black Alliance for Peace, you can go to blackallianceforpeace.com. And for information on some of my writings, you can go to ajamubaraka.com. And go to Facebook, and I'm tweeting now.
I want to thank both of you. We've enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank our team here in the studio. Remind everybody that next week we will be having a conversation with the Cuban trade unionist who's traveling here in the United States. So tune in, please, next Monday, July 3rd. And
Thank you, Taryn.
Thank you, Taryn.
Thank you, Taryn.
Thank you, Ajamu. Bye-bye.
Thank you.